All right, welcome to Chapter 60 of the Strength Culture Presents Quantum Lifting podcast, where we have a bit of a new segment we'll be running, or not new segment, new sort of structure where Pete will be hijacking Jamie's spot for the... the plan is every third episode, but who knows? Things change, so it might be more frequent, it might be less frequent. But that's going to be the rough guide every third or so episode because we want to start talking a little bit more in depth of the concepts that we've brought up with training in regards to the last couple of weeks. We've spoken about RPE quite heavily, something that everyone knows that we use here. We push it quite extensively, but we touched on self-awareness and that RPE needs a high level of self-awareness or able to evaluate intrinsic factors of your training and to make the correct decisions. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about self-awareness from Pete. Pete's he's got a lot of insight in this topic, and then how you can sort of apply that to your life, and also then obviously relate back to training as well. We probably won't touch too much on training though today. I might chuck in my own little anecdote because it's always easy for me to relate to training.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's going to be the concept. So pretty much, I think going forward, Jamie and I will probably just talk about training structures, philosophies, mentorship, all that sort of gym related crap, but then bring it back to the mindset stuff because I think that's something that we definitely want to push here at Strength Culture going forward. We've got a few little things in the work in regards to that stuff. I won't say too much on that yet, but a few little things coming up. So we're going to start littering it in the podcast, and it's definitely a route I want to take the podcast because it's something that interests me heavily.
Yeah.
I've probably mentioned before on the podcast, lifting is all good and fun, but
Yeah.
I think there's more to it than just throwing barbells around.
Well, absolutely.
And I'd like to delve into that stuff a little bit more. So
yeah.
that's the crux of today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you again for having me back and suggesting.
Thank you.
It's really good fun, and I really enjoy doing it. So I mean, I think the bit we were talking about with self-awareness, that's really interesting. And as you do talk about, I think training is a really good catalyst a lot of the time for becoming aware of yourself and your mental limitations and what's blocking you and where you feel stuck. And the interesting thing with self-awareness is it kind of the reason a lot of people prefer to stay in ignorance, I suppose, or a number of people choose not to really delve into the realm of self-awareness, is because it's very uncomfortable, unpleasant at times. You see things about yourself that you don't particularly like and you prefer to remain ignorant of. Now, there's a quote by the psychoanalyst Carl Jung.
Yep.
Jordan Peterson.
Is he still alive?
No, Carl Jung died many years ago. Yeah. He was one of the founding fathers of psychoanalysis, along with Freud, and Lacan was the other one. But Jung has had a big influence on Jordan Peterson's work, and he has this great quote on sort of about self-awareness or consciousness, which is, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain.
Yeah.
People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious."
I've heard that quote before. That's a really I like that quote a lot because Eckhart Tolle spoke about something very similar. When I saw him speak in 2017 at the plenary, the exhibition building, I reckon there was 4,000 or 5,000 people in there, massive packed, and he just sat on a little chair, spoke to everyone like he was just talking to you one-on-one.
Yeah.
He sat there for like 90 minutes, drank his water, and just spoke. And it was pretty cool, but he said the same thing, and I know he's touched on his book. There's no coming to awareness, consciousness without pain. And that, to me, sort of training can be a painful and unpleasant experience at times. It's obviously done for enjoyment, but the struggles within it can be quite... so then that is a good reflection of then when you face a hardship, you have to have sort of a level of self-awareness to then grow from that.
Well, I mean, training's an interesting one because it's kind of like a micro version of life in a lot of ways, because you're deliberately putting yourself under stress.
Stress, yeah.
consistently, and then you're finding that you're developing strength through subjecting yourself to stress, which is also what happens in life if you allow it to. That you put yourself in new uncomfortable situations that create stress. It also creates opportunities for you to see yourself more clearly, understand what you're doing. And it raises, if you allow it to, it increases your level of self-awareness. So I think it's both. That's the thing I really enjoy about training as well. It's like seeing how my mental attitude affects how I train and my ability to show up consistently, have endurance, keep going. And also sort of see things about myself as I go that I may not necessarily have been aware of or may not like necessarily. And I mean, I think that's the other key thing about self-awareness that I think is really important to touch on is that the issue when we gain more awareness can often be that we then become very, very critical of ourselves. Because what happens is we realize that we possess all these qualities that we haven't seen before. And Jung, again, talked a lot about this in terms of the shadow. He called it the shadow self. So basically, what happens is we all, as human beings, basically contain every quality a human being can contain. We all are wise, compassionate, generous, thoughtful. We're also all greedy, envious, hateful, bitter. We can be everything. Like every human being has the capacity to exhibit or experience that range.
It's that Indian, Native American Indian folklore of the two wolves, the battle of the two wolves, and one wolf is hate, anger, destruction, and the other one's love, peace, kindness, and he's telling the young kid, and who wins? The kid goes, well, who wins? And he goes, the wolf that you feed.
Exactly.
And so they're all present within us, and maybe the wolf will come out every so often. The unkind wolf, the destructive wolf, it shows itself. But if you keep feeding.
Well, the love but the other part of it is that the failure to acknowledge its existence is what Jung talked about a lot, was a big driver of problems for human beings, because when we don't acknowledge that we have those qualities, what we'll tend to do is disown them, and then we see them in the world. So Jung had a line, that which we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. So basically, the things that you don't acknowledge within yourself will manifest themselves outside in the world. So you will see yourself reflected back at you. And it's usually, annoyingly, the people that drive you crazy, like the people that really irritate you, are usually reflecting a quality in your character that you haven't acknowledged, that you've chosen to remain unconscious. And so the interesting thing about that is it requires a lot of courage to be able to see that and acknowledge that, because what will happen is if we refuse to acknowledge that we have those qualities as well, first of all, it disconnects us from other people. We turn in the world into good and bad people. Like, I'm a good person, these other people are bad people, etc., etc. And we don't acknowledge that we're all human beings. We're all capable of everything. And that if someone's behaving in a certain way, it's not because they're intrinsically bad, it's because they're lost, they're unaware, they're not aware of that aspect of themselves.
It all stems back to the 4 agreements, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's very simple. But something he recently reading the 4 agreements, he did speak about was the agreements we make as a child, and then we beat ourselves up over those agreements, and they're sort of conditioned into us. And one for me, for an example, like I was sleep.
Yes.
So it's only recently that and we spoke about beliefs last week, but only recently have I started to realize that, hang on, I can actually function on going to bed a bit later or not getting a great sleep, whereas I used to really believe that I couldn't sleep.
Yes.
And then I'd really beat myself up about it and make myself feel guilty if I went to bed late, whereas now I just accept I went to bed late. I was happy with my friends, went to bed a couple of hours late, big whoop, you'll be fine. Get on with it tomorrow. And that's something that I've only realised that and I'm sure there's other things I'll start to realise personally, and that other people out there have probably, hopefully this is triggering something within them to realise those personal
because
restrictions, beliefs that are restricting you or holding you back.
Well, it's interesting you talk about the beating yourself up thing, because I mean it is the sort of the bit, the logical extension of all of this is when we do gain awareness, we can then put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be different, right? And something I've really learnt is that willpower really doesn't work with internal stuff. Like trying to pressure yourself to be a different way is not effective. It's not an effective strategy internally. It works quite well. Willpower works quite well in the real world in terms of you push yourself to do lists or and things like that.
You got to write a essay or thesis or whatever. Or you got to do a big training session or go for a big run. You can the David Goggins that. Yeah. But you can't. Would you almost say that the internal state isn't really within your conscious control?
Interesting thing is that Jung actually said this again. He's getting name dropped a lot today, but he actually said what you resist persists. So when you resist internal states in particular, the more pressure you put on yourself to be different, the more likely you are to actually exhibit the behavior you're resisting. It will actually build up, and it's for instance people who are I'm guilty of this myself. People who are people pleasers, for example, who are trying to please people all the time and trying to come off as really nice all the time and really accommodating and friendly, they often have a lot of rage built up inside themselves because they're not getting their needs met, and they have a lot of resentment about that, but that's unconscious. So their resistance to that, though, and their attempt to always appear nice and kind and whatever, actually creates a sort of it's negative becomes more powerful in a way. It's like, because it's like creating a
turmoil within them because they're doing it not because they want to, but because they feel they have to.
Exactly.
And you're not necessarily being kind and showing up to things and doing things for people because you want to. It's just because you're almost too scared to say no.
Exactly. And then you end up resenting other people, even though they are just believing what you say when you say you're fine to do X, Y, and Z. But then you're sort of putting yourself in a victimized position. But the quote I was wanting to read, and Jeff Foster, who I put you on to, who I really like, I'll shout out to Jeff Foster. He's a British, again, he wouldn't call himself a teacher, but he is a spiritual teacher in Britain. He was, someone who really struggled with depression, anxiety for a really long time, and then had this really sort of profound awakening. And he has a really beautiful way of teaching I really resonate with. He's got an audiobook called The Deepest Acceptance, which I put Charlie on.
Yeah, I've listened to it. It's long.
And a bit repetitive.
It gets a bit, so I just listen to it in patches.
Yeah.
I've noticed that sometimes I'll just see what Jeff has to say today.
And he's usually saying the same thing. Anyway,
and I chuck it on for 20 minutes and I get a bit of a different
he's
perspective.
He's good when you are feeling really hard on yourself to have a listen to Jeff, because it takes the pressure off. And
it does.
His line that the quote I've got here: stop trying to heal yourself, fix yourself, even awaken yourself. Let go of letting go. Stop trying to fast forward the movie of your life, chasing futures that never seem to arrive. Instead, bow deeply to yourself as you actually are. Your pain, your sorrow, your doubts, your deepest longing, your fearful thoughts are not mistakes, and they aren't asking to be healed. They are asking to be held, here, now, lightly, in the loving arms of present awareness. So it's the whole idea that when we become aware of these qualities in ourselves, or these issues, we don't have to turn it into a drama of something that we have to eradicate or beat out of existence and so forth. We can just allow that element to exist and just be aware of it. And then it sort of leads you to have a lot more compassion also for other people, because you'll start to recognize that the limitations you see in other people or the issues other people are having are the same you have. You have those same
Everyone's living their own dream. So like this is the concept I find very interesting is that you have created. I'm 27, so 27 years of this idea of who you are and what you are.
Yeah.
But then every single person in your life has a completely different idea of who you are and what you are, and to them you're not the same person.
No.
In their minds, and that fascinates me because. Yeah, who am I? Like, what am I?
Well, Byron Katie says no two people have ever met, and no two people have ever met the same person, because we're all meeting the dream we have of the other person. Yeah. So I have a particular story of Charlie that runs through my head and that I relate to. And that's again another bit where it really does come back to, and again, this is the same point though, because the qualities I see in you are ultimately reflecting back qualities I possess. So it works both ways, right? Like if I really admire and respect someone because I think they're kind or thoughtful or whatever, I must also possess those qualities as well. And it goes both ways, right? Because it's almost like you can't see a colour outside the colour spectrum humans can see.
You have to be aware of what kindness is to see kindness.
Exactly.
Because you can't see a colour that you can't see.
Exactly. You can't even imagine a colour you can't see. Like, you can't imagine a colour outside the colour spectrum that human beings can see.
That's why even sometimes telling stories... listening to people talk about, like, say, psychedelic experiences or really, really profound experiences in their life. It almost like, to them, they're talking with such energy and such, like, passion. But to the person listening, it means nothing because they're just getting words and, like, they weren't there to experience. And so, like, whatever's going on in you will never sort of be, like... Unless people are there to share it with you in that moment, no one really ever gets it.
Well... And it's kind of the thing that you will understand others more, the more deeply and profoundly you become aware. Because if you're cutting off parts of yourself and refusing to accept, you can't understand. If you're refusing to acknowledge your own anger, your own bitterness, your own whatever, then you won't have compassion for other people when they're struggling with that. Because when we do fall into those things, it's not because we're trying to be unkind or whatever. It's because we're lost in a dream. We're believing certain thoughts about reality that aren't true.
True.
And so that's true for everybody, right? Like, so everybody, if someone's showing up in a particular way that we find really abhorrent, they're lost in a dream of reality that's just not true, right?
But wouldn't you say it's true for them?
It's true for them, but
it doesn't fit your version of reality.
It's true for them, but the point is, it's someone's lost. No one, if they were really aware of the what the spiritual teachers say, and I sort of rely on them for that, is that if someone were truly aware, they wouldn't be unkind. They just wouldn't. They wouldn't. It wouldn't occur to them because they wouldn't. There would be no impulse to do that because they would know that doesn't benefit them or others. Yeah. Like, they would never do that.
I was a bit blunt with someone over message.
Yeah.
And then a couple of hours later, I responded again, completely different, because I had a thought and I was like, that was a bit.
Yeah.
And then I just responded completely different, just to, because I was like, no, that was a bit blunt. Like, I was a bit.
But were you able to, when you realised that, have compassion for yourself? Of why?
Yeah, because at that moment I was probably a bit like a bit drained, or I'd been working quite a lot, and like, and then I realised I had a bit more like thought process. I was like, I should probably respond a little bit more with a bit more kindness or a bit more love and effort into that message, and I did. So, but whether they receive it that way on the other end, because they might not have even thought anything of the bluntness.
Well, I mean, that's always the issue also, is that you can become aware of something and apologise to someone and so forth, but they may not change their view of you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like it, because...
And that can be frustrating if you're relying on other people to sort of give you the stamp of approval kind of thing, that you've changed and so forth.
Yeah, but the thing is, I think by doing that, I gave myself the stamp of approval.
Awesome. That's perfect. Yeah.
So regardless of what the other person's like, well, no, I should be better in my response to that, and gave a better response.
And that's the best of us, the best we can ever do, really.
And
now we're changing over the video, so Charlie's just jumping up, but I'll keep talking. There's actually a quote by Robert Holden, which I really liked, which is, no amount of self-improvement can make up for any lack of self-acceptance.
What was that? Go again.
No amount of self-improvement can make up for any lack of self-acceptance.
No lack of self-improvement.
No amount of self-improvement can make up for any lack of self-acceptance.
So you have to accept first, then to improve.
Well, acceptance, it's an interesting one, right? Because the whole concept of self-improvement's a bit loaded in a level, because then you're always comparing yourself to a future state, which can very much rob you of your present experience. Because if you're always, it's the kind of thing where there's actually a Buddhist line that says abandon all hope of fruition, which is basically the idea that you can't delay, you can't be waiting for the point where you've improved enough that you've ticked all the boxes, basically.
Well, there's no such thing as perfection.
No.
And I can actually, if I can find it quickly, keep talking.
Yeah, I always do.
Because we were literally talking about this, and Jamie actually put a ripper quote in the our coaching group, but I don't know how far back it is.
Carl Rogers, who's another quite significant psychoanalyst, he actually wrote, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. It's this weird dynamic, right, that actually the more we resist who we are, the more we become stuck in our patterns. It's actually allowing ourselves and acknowledging and having compassion for our imperfections, our human frailties, our limitations, our humanity.
It's like almost like the world keeps giving you that same situation because you're refusing to accept it and try and improve on it. So the only way to bring you to awareness of the situation is by keep giving you the stimulus that brings it.
And isn't that true in life, that you'll keep getting the same lesson over? I have found that throughout my entire life, and the lesson almost gets more aggressive each time. It's like the universe will give you a touch on the shoulder and then it'll smash you in the face with a frying pan until you listen, because the more you resist it, the more it will come back at you.
It's something I'm trying to sort of practice now with our living situation, because we're a little bit unsure of what's going to happen with the house.
Yeah.
The other, number two, the one that he's built 6 of them, but it's up for auction today. We're not sure what he wants to do with ours. He'll probably, if he sells well today, probably want to sell it. So I'm just trying to practice and not have any attachment to the property.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I'm not going to be there, regardless if it's tomorrow or 6 months or a year. One day we will have to depart the property, but having no attachments, because it's just a piece of timber.
Yeah.
Like, there's nice memories in there. There's a nice location. But every time you have a new something new happening in life, it seems to always work out well. Fine. So you move to a new place, and it's a chance for new experiences.
Well, and you don't.
Yeah.
In life, you really have no idea what's good or bad.
No.
You really don't know. Because I've consistently had things happen that I thought was the worst possible outcome to a situation. Really, bad, in my head, in my opinion, bad situations. And, now on reflection, I realize either I learnt a lot from that, and that's really changed how I show up in the world, or alternatively, it led to a completely different opportunity I hadn't even anticipated.
Yes.
And then you don't know. So there's really you can't know, there's that level of trust in the process of life that's very, very powerful. There's actually a quote by Rilke so there's a poet, German poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, dead for a long time, just before you ask, who, one of my all-time favorite poet, very profound. And here's a quote that actually reminds me of this. He says, "How should we be able to forget those ancient myths that are at the beginning of all people? The myths about dragons that at the last moment turn into princesses. Perhaps all the dragons of our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us once beautiful and brave. Perhaps everything terrible is, in its deepest being, something helpless that wants help from us."
Deep.
That's deep, profound.
Yeah,
Do you want me to send you that one?
Yeah,
you can have a think on that.
Yeah,
one.
that one needs to be thought about.
That's some profound
There's
stuff.
some
right
profound
there.
stuff.
Yeah, well, we like going deep here, but
We do.
yeah, but I mean, I know you and I have talked a lot about the self-compassion
Yes.
stuff. Has the training been interesting for you
Oh.
in learning self-compassion?
Yeah, so I was going to say, well, quickly, let's relate it back before we wrap it up and how to sort of apply it, maybe a bit more application. I think I sort of discovered the self-compassion, being a bit easier on myself with training as I think it's just maturing as someone who's done it for some years now, and as I do it more. But you sort of, with a sport that is powerlifting where it's very objective, you kind of have to be a little bit more, take a step back and understand there is ups and downs and it's not linear. And the more you can understand that, so the more educated I became on what's actually happening in the process of getting stronger, the more education I had on that, the more I could understand that, well, it's just part of the process. You go up and down, up and down, up and down. Happens, but the general trend is linear. So I started to understand that. So that was a lot easier. I could be just like, oh, I've had a down session today, crazy. But the other thing was when I really started to detach from the self-worth of the numbers, because numbers don't mean anything.
Yeah, they don't.
Like they don't mean nothing. And like, I had people after I pulled 300 ask me how it felt, how did I feel? And I was like, felt the same. Felt the same as when I pulled 290 for the first time. The excitement felt the same as any other milestone lift. It was no special, just because 300 probably seen as a bit more of a milestone. But it doesn't feel, because I've detached from that meaning, that I don't let it have meaning in my life. I like seeing the reward of putting in work and getting the result. It's the same with my guitar now. I like seeing a song coming together. It's like, oh wow, I couldn't even do this 2 months ago. Now it's like sounding like the song. But the self-worth doesn't change, because you never really, who you are doesn't change because you hit a certain number.
No, and I mean, it's a good application for everything in life, because I mean, particularly in this culture, we attach a lot of our value to our career status, our monetary status. We have a set of requirements. We feel
to get there. Everyone talks about getting there, and I'm like, where is
so you've got
there?
to buy a house, get the partner, have the children, have the career, reach a certain level. And it was sort of a weird in my experience, because I sort of reached the top level of a particular career trajectory relatively early on. I ended up becoming the managing director of a company, a multi-million-dollar company kind of thing. And it wasn't really a job super suited to me upon reflection, and B, also I wasn't happy, in that role. And nowadays I earn less money, I have less sort of status in a way. I don't manage a whole lot of people. I don't, run a major company or anything. And my level of joy in my life is way more.
Yeah, well, I've discussed this with people before. Everything comes at a cost of something. So for me, working a 30-hour week comes at the cost of, maybe I'm not making 150K, but the person that's making 150K is working 60 hours a week and miserable. Yeah. And so I have plenty of time to train, I have plenty of time to learn guitar, I have plenty of time to spend time with people I care about, which for me, those values are probably what's important in life. So I'm happy making less money to do those things, but that's a cost, that's a trade-off. It means maybe I might buy a house later than earlier, but I'm not in a rush. And that was something that I had a very big not breakdown, but like, just because I've decided to go on 2 overseas trips this year, which means that I always had this I had to buy a house, but then I started to realize, I don't know if that was my own belief. I think that was a belief from society, maybe like even being Greek background. It's a very
Yes.
Greek thing.
Yeah.
I think it's a very Australian thing. Like
It
when I
is.
say Greek Australian, but I think even just Australian culture, people are like, oh, you're wasting money on renting. I'm like, well, this year's been the last year's been crazy. It's been great. I've had the best time living with a couple of friends. The experience I've had, like, you can't buy that with money. And then when we die, money's not a thing
Well,
anymore.
as I say always, there's no point being the richest bitch in the cemetery.
Yeah.
And I mean, and not to disparage anybody being smart with their money or buying a house or investing and so forth. Like, absolutely, that's not the point. The point is, you can't delay your. You're not going to attain a state where you become worthy through ticking a series of those boxes.
No.
And that you need to live a life that's true to your own, values and journey and where you're at.
I will say Jamie and I are both very massive on the Barefoot Investor. So we are both very smart with our money, the way we've set it up, systems, and we do so that, yeah, we can go on travels and trips and hopefully buy a house and whatever. But, me and Jamie both drive really cheap cars. They're little decisions that we made along the way that, I don't want to buy a $30,000 car when I can drive a $3,000 car.
Yeah.
Like little things like that. And that's fine. I don't judge anyone who buys an expensive car if that's what makes you happy. And that's, but if it's not, and you feel like it's something you just have to do because everyone else is doing, or that you're not going to be a certain level of in the social hierarchy because you don't have a nice car or a house, or I feel like that's something maybe to reassess within yourself if you feel like it's not something that you truly want, because that's what I felt with the pressure of buying a house. I don't actually want it right now, and I had this pressure, and I felt guilty about spending money on traveling, and I was like, hang on, I worked for this money.
Yeah.
It's my money. I'm wise with my money. Why can't I go on 2 holidays and travel the world and see some shit?
No, absolutely, and you're young.
And so why should I feel guilty about that? That was the thing that sort of ticked it over in me. Was why am I feeling guilty about going
I
away?
have a sort of a mantra almost that again, it's a line from Byron Katie, and she says that actually I texted. I have her phone number, so I texted her because I said, you never post this quote, and then she did, because I love it so much. It says, move without resistance toward the kindest thought involved with action. And so it's kind of like living your life moving towards the kindest thing you can think to do for yourself and for others, and then if the kindest thing in your life is to go on an overseas trip, then why not? You can't find a good reason not to. And then the best any of us is ever going to do is follow that guidance, that inner, learn to trust that inner guidance. The funny
thing is, all the stuff we're talking about accepting, and the more you resist, the more it persists. The more I let go of that idea, the more I've actually sort of found that I actually have an abundance of money and financial security and I'm still with saving, I'm still in a surplus of saving, even with the 2 trips. So was that all just a thought and a catastrophizing it in my own head? And I also had that same experience with training. The more I tried to force getting stronger, the less I actually enjoyed it. And so when I took a step back and just train, hit your RPEs, come in, get it done, I've actually found I've gotten stronger and I've enjoyed it more by just letting it.
Well, it's actually
which is what we were speaking about before, which is something I try and instill into all my guys. To just you can't force. Something my coach said to me: you can't force adaptation. You show up, you can do the work, make smart decisions. Adaptation will happen as it's meant to. There'll be plateaus, there'll be little stalls. It will come.
Well, it was really interesting because that actually happened to me today.
Which is exactly what you said before about you can't willpower internal states. You can't willpower adaptation.
No, you can't willpower adaptation. And I mean, Taoist, the Tao Te Ching, which is I shout out to everyone. I reckon everyone should have a read. It's very beautiful sort of poetry, short form sort of stanzas, and very ancient Chinese spiritual text. But in Taoism, original philosophical Taoism, they talked a lot this notion of Wu Wei, which is actionless action, which is basically you act in a way. It's not to be completely passive and not do anything, but you act in the flow of reality, if that makes sense. So you don't resist things, you act in accordance. It's that whole notion of being like the water rather than the rock. So
was it Bruce Lee that said that? Be like water.
Well, no, actually, it was Taoist. He got that from the Tao Te Ching.
Be like water.
Yeah, be like water. So you flow with what is versus resisting, because it's actually the resistance that keeps you stuck.
Well, it fascinates me because when I first powerlifted, it was like maybe my second comp, and I was so upset, not upset, but I couldn't. Why didn't I squat 220? But like, it makes so much sense to me now. It's like you just didn't do it because you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Because you weren't at that level yet.
No.
It will come, and now I've squatted way more than 220. Like, it will happen. Just be the water. It'll flow. You'll get to the certain part of the river when you're meant to get to that certain part of the river.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It makes a lot of sense. So it's saying that's when we can swing all that back to what we've all said. Being kind to yourself when it comes to powerlifting or training or strength training, being kind to yourself in that regards. Don't beat yourself up if you haven't got a number or didn't get a number. Do the work. Be objective. We talk a lot about being objective. Be objective with what you can control in that situation to be better, and the fact, getting a bit more sleep. But then at the same time, learning to be kind to yourself when you have a late night or you do something that maybe isn't moving towards that goal. Because just accept it. Be part of accepting. So and
be like Bruce Lee.
Be the water.
Be the water.
The water's going to hit some rocks sometimes, but it just flows over and keeps going.
And also just be aware also that when you do find yourself in a place of resistance, it's like Jeff Foster says, almost let go of letting go. Like, if you do find yourself feeling stuck, that's okay too. Like, you don't even need to resist that.
Yeah.
Like, that some days you will get really annoyed with stuff. Some days things will feel overwhelming. Some days you won't cope well. And that's okay too. Like, there's no point where it's not fundamentally okay. Where you're at. And it's just this constant process of acknowledging, and then you'll find, my experience is that you find that the more you do that, also the weirdly less judgmental you are of others, and the more understanding you can be, because you can go, I get that because I do that too. Yeah. So, yeah, there we go.
I was going to say, because we're heading over our time sort of, is there any big quotes you have to finish off?
I did. There's actually a poem, just to really go out there. I don't know how our strength culture audience...
Oh, if they've made it this far, they can...
they'll love a poem. It's a poem by a really amazing poet named Mary Oliver. And it's called Wild Geese. And it sort of sums up this attitude, in my opinion. It goes... You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination. Calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Circle of life. I've realised the Disney movies have very profound meanings.
They do.
You
find that I find a lot of lines from pop culture,
like even Aladdin, like the concept of like the princess loving the peasants and
fairy tales and things like that.
Love is not love, like social status shouldn't affect, like love is something in the Lion King, like the circle of life, and
you can find wisdom everywhere.
Taking your place in the circle of life when Simba wants to run away, like a very, very profound shit.
One of my favorite quotes on victim mentality is from South Park. Yeah, I don't have it.
Rick and Morty,
very wise.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Because people are like, oh, it's just a stoner show. And I'm like, actually, if you watch it and listen to what Rick says a lot of the time, it's profound shit.
It's very profound.
And they're little jabs at like society and like...
It's a smart show.
Is that written by the South Park? No,
Dan Harmon wrote.
differing.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we'll
Thanks, gang.
we'll finish off. And that's We'll see you.
Yeah,
we'll
I'll
see
be
you
back in a few weeks.
in the next podcast.
If you'll have me.
You will.
Good
We'll be back.
times.
Done. Ciao.